¿A dónde va?
You are witnessing an invasion, an ongoing invasion that has been escalating for over a decade. The scenes you are watching are typical of what can be seen daily at hundreds of points all along our southern border, where each day thousands of people from countries all over the world enter the United States illegally. All of these people are on U.S. soil in violation of our law. Most illegal aliens enter along the U.S.-Mexican border. Some are smuggled across in secret compartments in some of the thousands of vehicles that cross the border each day. Others will enter using forged documents. Still others will fly into this country on student or tourist visas and never leave. The vast majority, however, will simply wade in, swim in, or walk in. Their chances of escaping apprehension are quite good. The U.S. Border Patrol is too short on men and resources even to give chase in many instances. Even so, for 6 years running now, the Border Patrol has apprehended well over 1 million illegal aliens per year. In 1986, the Border Patrol's arrests totaled 1.8 million. That's nearly 2 million people caught entering this country in violation of our law in a single year. By the most conservative and optimistic estimates, 1 or 2 illegal aliens successfully penetrate our border and escape inland for each illegal who is arrested and deported. Border Patrol officers all along our southern front have told us that the ratio is really much higher, more on the order of 4 or 5 to 1. That means that, at the least, well over 1 million illegal aliens make it into this country annually, and more likely, the total is closer to several million. Who are these people that make up this surging tide of humanity breaking on our shores? Are they refugees fleeing political or religious persecution? Desperate peasants seeking work so they can feed their starving families? Economic pilgrims seeking a more affluent lifestyle, perhaps intending to live off the welfare system? Are they hardened criminals who will victimize other aliens or American citizens? Are they drug pushers or agents of hostile foreign powers? Or perhaps even terrorists? They are all of these and more, and they continue to come by the hundreds of thousands. As long ago as 1975, then Commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, General Leonard Chapman, warned that illegal immigration is out of control. The following year, Commissioner Chapman said, "There are today in the United States 6 to 8 million illegal aliens, and that number is increasing by 500,000 to 1 million each year." Despite the growing crisis, Congress refused to act. In October 1983, President Reagan was merely stating what had been painfully obvious for many years when he said, "This country has lost control of its own borders, and no country can sustain that kind of position." The President and Congress finally responded to this crisis by enacting the controversial and badly misnamed Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. They assured us that this would remedy the problem. That bill is now law, but the invasion continues on a massive scale. In 1956, U.S. Border Patrol arrested 87,696 foreign nationals entering this country illegally. Apprehensions in 1966 reached over 138,000. A decade later, in 1976, they topped 1 million. By the end of 1986, they were approaching 2 million per year. The number of arrests dipped in 1987, due largely to the removal of Border Patrol agents from the border to work on the newly passed employer sanctions and other new programs. This notwithstanding, the Border Patrol still expelled over 1.2 million illegal aliens in 1987. 1988 will be another million-plus year. No one knows for sure just how many foreign nationals have illegally entered the United States and taken up residence here on a permanent or semi-permanent basis. As we have previously noted, INS Commissioner Chapman put the total at 6 to 8 million. That was back in 1976. President Jimmy Carter replaced General Chapman with Lionel J. Castillo. Castillo attempted to downplay the seriousness of the situation by claiming that there were only 3 to 6 million illegals in the U.S. The Independent Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy, established by Congress in 1978, estimated the total to be around 8 million. Maurice C. Inman, General Counsel for the INS, stated in 1986 that 12 to 15 million is a more realistic figure. The Liberal Environmental Fund claims that 20 million is closer to the mark. Regardless of which figures one accepts, the numbers involved are staggering. An influx of this magnitude over such a short time has enormous economic, social, political, and national security ramifications. We will examine those shortly, but please keep in mind that the numbers we've been discussing thus far deal only with illegal immigrants. During this same period that we've been experiencing such large-scale violation of our borders, we've also been welcoming a record number of legal immigrants to our shores. By the end of 1989, we will have set an all-time record of 9 million new immigrants admitted in one decade. The United States has been traditionally, and remains today, the most liberal country in the world with regard to immigration. In fact, we accept twice as many immigrants annually as all of the other nations of the world combined. But is it in our interest to continue those policies which allow and encourage immigration on such a large scale? Merely asking this question incites cries of discrimination, xenophobia, and racism from some quarters. We are reminded that we are a nation of immigrants and are told that it is selfish, inhumane, and even un-American to restrict the flow of those who wish to come to this land. The Statue of Liberty, we are told, is our statement to the world that we will accept all of their poor and huddled masses. We are indeed a nation of immigrants, and we're rightfully proud of our distinctive heritage, rich in the cultures, tongues, and contributions of peoples from many nations. For more than 3 centuries, America has been a refuge and a beacon, indeed a magnet, to peoples the world over. During the 18th and 19th centuries, there was little reason to be concerned about immigration. America had vast open frontiers and was in need of new hands that were willing to work. Even though there were few restrictions placed on immigration during the first century of our republic, there was never any question that immigration to this country was a privilege, not a right. There are those now, however, who claim that immigration is indeed a right. This notion, of course, is absurd. As a sovereign nation, the people of the United States, through their elected representatives, have a right to determine who may immigrate to this country and to establish the criteria for admission. This is the right of all sovereign nations. This was clearly recognized by America's founding fathers. Our Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, gives to Congress the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. The United States Supreme Court, in 1875, ruled that state laws regulating immigration were unconstitutional. Clearly, immigration matters are the responsibility of the federal government. The individual states are neither empowered nor equipped to deal with this matter. Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution says this: "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this Union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion." The federal government, however, has been ignoring its constitutional mandate regarding these vital responsibilities, while at the same time involving itself in many other areas for which there is no constitutional justification. Our government in Washington, for instance, is spending tens of billions of dollars and employing tens of thousands of individuals in the departments of energy, education, and health and human services, while allowing our borders to go unprotected. The Federal Department of Education has 4,500 employees on payroll and a budget in excess of $20 billion. The Department of Energy, with an employee force of over 16,000, has a budget of $13.7 billion. Then there's the Department of Health and Human Services, with a whopping manpower pool of more than 116,000 and a budget of $375 billion. By contrast, the INS, including the Border Patrol, operates out of the Department of Justice on less than $1 billion and a workforce that is due to increase to slightly above 5,000 by the end of 1988. With these relatively puny resources, the INS and Border Patrol are charged with securing our thousands of miles of border, inspecting several million places of employment, and maintaining records on millions of foreign visitors. Along our 2,000-mile border with Mexico, where over 95% of our illegal alien arrests are made, the Border Patrol has been operating with less than 2,500 officers. In real terms, that has meant that during a normal work shift, no more than 500 to 600 agents are actually manning our entire southern border, and oftentimes the number is even far lower than that. By the end of 1988, they're scheduled to be augmented to a total of 3,600 officers, a significant increase, but still far from adequate. By contrast, New York City has a police force of nearly 27,000 officers. Los Angeles has nearly 7,400 men in uniform. Mike Rodriguez is a member of the Community Advisory Committee of the Southern Texas District of the U.S. Department of Justice. A former faculty member of the Defense Information School in Indianapolis, Mr. Rodriguez is an authority on immigration issues and subversive movements.
The average American is not aware of the fact that Border Patrol even exists, or even what the Border Patrol responsibilities are. They are under the Department of Justice with the Immigration Naturalization Service, and their purpose is to enforce what's called the pause for inspection at our borders. What this means is that there are several conditions that a person must meet before they can enter this country legally. And I emphasize legally, because all the media is concerned with is the sanctuary movement and the plight of illegal aliens. Yet they are never making the general public aware of the fact that there are millions of people who enter this country legally. Hundreds of thousands of people every year who go through the legitimate process of obtaining documentation, going through the pause for inspection and entering this country and becoming legal citizens of the United States. The pause for inspection calls for the following conditions. Those conditions are that the person will not become a ward of the state. He will not become dependent upon the social services of this country during the time that he is becoming a citizen, during those years of probationary study before he actually is sworn in as a U.S. citizen. Also, he does not have a criminal past. He is not a felon seeking to enter this country to escape punishment for a crime he has committed, or has committed a crime and served his time, but it is not eligible to enter this country because he has committed a felony crime, murder, rape, insurrection, whatever it might be, kidnapping. Also, a person must be thoroughly investigated in his background as to whether or not he is physically or emotionally fit to enter this country. Is he a potential health hazard? A good example would be the illegal aliens who entered this country from Haiti through Florida in the early 1980s, which later the Center for Disease Control found to be a major source of the HIV or AIDS virus as we know it in this country today. There are other reasons why a person must pause for inspection, as the Act calls for, and that is to study a person's political allegiance. Does he hold faith with a political philosophy that calls for the overthrow of the United States government and the destruction of the U.S. Constitution? Does he hold allegiance to terrorist organizations bent on creating violent crimes either against the people of this country or its government? So these are things that the press never makes you aware of. These are the reasons why we have a Border Patrol and an Immigration Naturalization Service investigating team available throughout the borders, not only with Mexico, but our borders with Canada, to ensure that only people who have a legitimate reason to enter this country and are showing a potential of becoming contributing, participating citizens of this country are allowed to enter this country legally.
They can even come here and claim asylum, and we have provisions for that.
If they can prove imminent danger to their person, if they can prove that they themselves are directly threatened by their political participation in their country, they can apply for political asylum. These are all legitimate reasons for entering the United States.
The border fence, erected in 1975 at a cost of $5 million, is now intact in only a few heavily guarded places. The vehicles you see passing by just a few feet on the other side of this stretch of fence near San Diego are on the Ensenada Highway in Tijuana, Mexico. Smugglers have clipped the fence, leaving just a flap that a car or truck can drive through. Appropriately, someone has painted this sign on the border fence at Imperial Beach, San Diego. Sin fronteras means without borders, and on most days you can see illegals starting their journey north here along the Pacific Ocean. Sophisticated technology plays an important role in border enforcement. This is the computer control center at the Border Patrol station near San Diego. Signals from hundreds of motion detector sensors buried in the ground are transmitted to this room, and these operators then relay to the agents in the field the locations at which foot traffic or vehicular traffic has been detected. But on most days, the traffic is so heavy that there are just not enough officers in the field to respond. Night scopes, such as the one you see here, are also tremendous aids to the Border Patrol, but manpower shortages often preclude their use. Why? A scope requires the deployment of 2 officers, one to operate the scope and the other to stand guard so that the operator is not attacked and overpowered by illegal aliens or by the bandits who prey upon the aliens. Our men and women in green are in constant danger to life and limb, and nearly all carry visible battle scars. For their personal safety, they should be assigned to the field in 2-man teams, but the standard is still 1 officer per vehicle. These lone agents, often with inoperable radios and vehicles of dubious reliability, regularly patrol remote and dangerous areas where they may be outnumbered by as much as 100 to 1. Along some stretches of our border, our officers dare not venture except in war wagons, outfitted with special screens for protection against the barrages of rocks, bottles, and chunks of metal or concrete. Our thin green line is being overwhelmed. They simply can't keep up with the ever-rolling tide of aliens. Every hour of every day, busloads of Mexican nationals are returned to the border and released back into Mexico. Within hours, many of them will be back in the United States. Rain or shine, day or night, 365 days a year, the invasion continues. This is our port of entry at San Ysidro, California, which handles some 12 million vehicle crossings and 10 million pedestrian crossings a year. The story is much the same at El Paso, Texas, our second busiest port of entry, and at Brownsville, Laredo, Hidalgo, Calexico, Nogales, and many other ports. Much smuggling of both drugs and aliens goes undetected because we have the enforcement manpower for only cursory, sporadic checks of vehicles and foot traffic. In most areas, customs officers are limited to approximately 30 seconds per vehicle and only a couple of seconds per person. Because of this ease of entry, people from all over the world come to Mexico to slip into the U.S. illegally. Foreign nationals from more than 100 countries are apprehended annually on our southern border. The vast majority of illegal aliens enter this country at those relatively few areas along our border where the Mexican and U.S. cities have grown almost together. With no real barriers, they can quickly cross over into San Diego, El Paso, or Brownsville, for instance, and blend into the local population. This involves no more than about 100 miles of our border, where most of the illegal trafficking takes place. Simply putting up a well-patrolled, double-fenced borderline through these areas would curtail most of the invasion we're experiencing. Let's look at some of the ramifications of this massive influx of both legal and illegal immigrants. One of the very important factors today in the immigration equation that was absent when earlier immigrant waves hit these shores is our gargantuan welfare state. Previous generations of immigrants arrived here as destitute as any of those arriving today. They had to work to survive. There was no alternative. There was no free lunch. What assistance was available came from friends, relatives, church, and private charities. That is a far cry from today. This booklet, El Otro Lado, has been distributed by the thousands to illegal aliens. Translated, it says, The Other Side, a guide for the undocumented. It's published by the radical left group in Albuquerque, New Mexico called the Resource Center. This guide provides the illegal aliens with an extensive list of organizations with addresses and telephone numbers, many of them toll-free, in almost every state in the Union that they can contact for legal assistance in fighting deportation. They are told how to apply for all of the welfare and medical benefits available to them in this welfare wonderland. Another radical document, the so-called Bill of Rights for the Undocumented Worker, is distributed widely to illegal aliens by farm workers unions, legal aid organizations, so-called immigrants' rights groups, and liberal churches. Article 5 of this Bill of Rights states, "Every immigrant worker shall fully enjoy all the rights guaranteed to citizen workers, including socioeconomic and labor rights." Article 7 demands that every immigrant worker shall be guaranteed the same rights enjoyed by U.S. citizens, especially the right of access to free and adequate social and health services, child care, and other similar social benefits. A 1986 study by the Chief Administrative Office of Los Angeles County determined that services to illegal aliens were costing county taxpayers nearly $173 million per year. County hospitals and health delivery systems have been particularly hard hit. At the Los Angeles County University of Southern California Medical Center, as many as 80% of the babies delivered are born to mothers who are either illegal aliens or newly legalized aliens. County and federal taxpayers will pick up most of the tab. Article 8 of the Bill of Rights for the Undocumented Worker states that every immigrant worker shall have the right to quality public education in his or her native language. The U.S. Supreme Court apparently agrees with this radical idea because in 1982, in a 5-4 decision, our High Court ruled that a Texas law prohibiting the use of public school funds to educate the children of illegal aliens was unconstitutional. Consequently, school authorities now do not even try to determine the legal status of students. And so-called bilingual education, which results in illiteracy in 2 languages, is mandated now in many of our schools. Los Angeles public schools are bursting at the seams and are going to year-round rotating class schedules because of the tremendous numbers of children of illegal aliens. The alien influx has also contributed greatly to our spiraling crime statistics. Most illegal aliens are not criminally inclined, and other than violating our immigration laws, will not engage in illegal activities. But when we're dealing with millions of aliens, it does not take a large percentage to add up to a sizable criminal element. Here are some figures compiled in 1987 by the INS from law enforcement agencies in Southern California. In San Diego County, illegal aliens are involved in 1/3 of the rapes and murders and 1/4 of the burglaries. In Orange County, they account for over half the homicides. In the city of Santa Ana, aliens are responsible for about 90% of the narcotics traffic, and in Fullerton, 80%. During 1987, the INS Western Regional Office deported 10,000 illegal aliens for criminal activities, most of them serious felony offenses. Half of these cases were drug-related. Our uncontrolled borders are an open invitation to the international drug cartels to flood the American market with their deadly wares, and they have done just that. Our back roads, our interstates, and our airways in the Southwest have become cocaine corridors and heroin highways, transporting billions of dollars worth of narcotics transshipped through Mexico. The Border Patrol accounts for 70% of the drug interdiction on our southern border, even though that is not their primary responsibility. Our large alien population is having an enormous impact upon our political process that affects every American. According to a recent study by the Congressional Research Service, approximately 2 million illegal aliens were included in the Census Bureau's 1980 reapportionment count. This resulted in a gain of an extra seat each in the U.S. House of Representatives for California and New York, at the expense of Indiana and Georgia. According to projections from the study, reapportionment following the 1990 census will likely result in the loss of 1 or more House seats for Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. States with high illegal alien populations will gain. California is expected to pick up 3 to 5 House seats. Texas and Florida, 3 to 4 seats each, and Arizona, 1 seat. In February of 1988, a group of plaintiffs, including the state of Kansas, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and 40 members of Congress representing 13 states, filed suit in U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. They are challenging the U.S. Census Bureau's decision to include illegal aliens in the count for congressional reapportionment. Pennsylvania Congressman Tom Ridge, a plaintiff in the suit and a leader in the fight against including illegals in the reapportionment count, charges that the practice is not only unfair, not only illogical and ill-conceived, but also unconstitutional. It does take a twisted sort of logic to argue that people who have no right to be in this country, who have come here and remain here in violation of the law, not only have a right to representation in Congress, but may exercise that right at the expense of the rights of American citizens. Yet that appears to be the view of the Census Bureau. In its pamphlet titled Counting for Representation, the Census and the Constitution, the Bureau asserts that equal representation is for everyone, citizen or not, and everyone must be counted for that. That is a view shared by the radical authors of the Illegal Alien Bill of Rights, but not by the Founding Fathers who authored the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. The Bill of Rights for the Undocumented Worker demands that every immigrant worker shall have the right to vote in local and state elections without having to become citizens. Many immigrants' rights activists claim this right for federal elections as well, and they are taking advantage of our overall lax registration process to sign up numerous non-citizen voters. The County of Los Angeles, with the largest illegal alien population in the country, has an extensive $1 million a year voter outreach program. It involves the distribution of postcard voter forms at 3,500 locations, 85 full-time bilingual registrars, and 24-hour toll-free telephone help, all in an effort to increase the number of minority and especially Hispanic voters. But even this is not aggressive enough to satisfy some. Attorneys for the American Civil Liberties Union, representing the organization Common Cause, brought suit against the county, claiming that it was not doing everything possible to register all eligible ethnic minority members. Incredible as it may seem, Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Jack M. Newman ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and ordered the county to deputize some 20,000 county employees to sign up voters. If his judgment stands, it will almost certainly result in the registration of many thousands of non-citizens. A final judgment has not been rendered in this case yet, but the fact that a suit of this sort could be brought in the first place and then sustained through the appeals process all the way to the state high court is alarming evidence of the degree to which the subversives are succeeding in changing the very definition of rights in America. At this rate, the day may not be far off when Article 2 of the so-called Bill of Rights for the Undocumented Worker is accepted as the law of the land. That article states, every immigrant worker shall have all of the constitutional rights guaranteed all persons in the U.S. and shall be free from deportations and other unconstitutional practices. In other words, those who come here in violation of our laws shall have all the rights of citizenship and shall dictate to us the terms of their stay here. Another very important dimension of our immigration crisis is the very real threat that it poses to our national security. If millions of illegal alien peasants can slip across our border, isn't it reasonable to assume that foreign terrorists, agents of hostile powers, even Soviet Spetsnaz commandos could do the same thing? We will examine the national security threat in Part 2 of this program. According to the findings of a 1984 Gallup poll, public concern over our uncontrolled immigration is very high, and the American public takes a hard line toward illegal aliens. Other nationwide polls have come up with similar results. As Burns Roper of the Roper poll noted, it is rare on any poll question to find such a lopsided result. If the harmful effects of our massive unregulated immigration are so readily apparent, and if public sentiment registers so strongly in opposition to its continuation, why hasn't Congress acted to correct this situation? Congress finally did respond to the mounting crisis by passing the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, now often referred to as IRCA, or the Simpson-Rodino Act, after its principal authors Senator Alan Simpson and Congressman Peter Rodino. Retired INS investigator Carl Nelson served 25 years with the Border Patrol and the INS in Texas, New York, and California. Like most of his colleagues, he sees IRCA as a colossal disaster.
But Congress abrogated their responsibility during the whole time. And finally, when they did something, it was like in the military. Do something even if it's wrong. And they did.
The new law has three main features: amnesty, also known as legalization, employer sanctions, and enhanced enforcement. Under the general amnesty provision, those aliens who have resided here illegally since before 1982 are eligible for legalization. By the application cutoff date of May 4, 1988, 1,760,163 aliens had applied for this amnesty. A second amnesty program called SAW, SAW, for seasonal agricultural workers, is available to illegal aliens who worked in agriculture for at least 90 days between May 1985 and May 1986. The INS expects 900,000 to apply for the SAW amnesty before the application deadline. The program has been marked by widespread fraud. At many legalization centers, like this one in Harlingen, Texas, ineligible aliens arrive from Mexico daily, often even in cars with Mexican license plates, and apply for amnesty with phony documents. The employer sanctions make it illegal for an employer to hire any alien not authorized to work in the U.S. and requires all employers to verify that all of their employees are either U.S. citizens or that they have legal permission to work here.
And I remember in the mid-'70s discussing it with my fellow employees in the Los Angeles office, and statements being made like, well, when this thing comes to a head, we're going to have more government. We're going to get another law that's going to put the blame upon the businessman, who of course did not create the problem. He may have benefited from it, some of those people, but they didn't create the problem. But they were going to be given the burden of proof, and there was going to be a law against them. We felt that was true in the mid-'70s. It's now come true with the new immigration law, which makes the Immigration Service like any other regulatory agency over business. And we've come that far.
The enforcement provisions in the law proposed a 50% budget increase for the INS and Border Patrol, which, as we discussed in our first segment, is far from adequate, considering the magnitude of the crisis on our borders and the overwhelming demands placed on our immigration officers. The Immigration Reform and Control Act was, in reality, a sellout to the commercial interests that benefit from illegal alien labor and the professional agitators at the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Lawyers Guild, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the United Farm Workers, the Communist Party, and the Revolutionary Communist Party. So one might expect that the noisy immigrant rights lobby would be pleased with their accomplishment, and with the 2.5 million soon-to-be legalized aliens in the amnesty programs. However, they are far from satisfied. As they see it, the amnesty program is too restrictive and should be expanded to allow for the legalization of many more aliens. These groups are involved now in many court challenges that are forcing the INS to accept for legalization many thousands more aliens who did not qualify for amnesty. Actually, many of these revolutionaries are committed to the total abolition of our immigration laws and the obliteration of our border. This is evident by their continuous harassing litigation through which they tie up the INS and the immigration courts. It is evident also from their literature and their strategy conferences, such as this Break Down the Border conference held in April 1987 at the Hermanos Escobar Agricultural School in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and the University of Texas at El Paso. The conference endorsers and attendees included many of the leading figures in the radical Hispanic and immigrant rights network, Many of these extremists are also active in the so-called sanctuary movement, another part of the multi-pronged attack on our immigration laws. The sanctuary activists smuggle alleged refugees from El Salvador and Guatemala into the United States and then parade them around the country to denounce U.S. foreign policy in Central America. They are often open about their solidarity with the communist FMLN terrorists in El Salvador and the communist regimes in Cuba and Nicaragua. There are provisions within our law for those who are fleeing persecution in their homelands to apply for asylum when they arrive here. But the sanctuary radicals refuse to go through the legal channels and openly defy the law, sometimes even daring the INS to arrest them. They have succeeded in gaining support for their cause from several hundred churches across the country. One of the most influential supporters of the sanctuary movement is Los Angeles Archbishop Roger Mahony, prelate of the nation's largest Roman Catholic diocese. Besides supporting the criminal activities of the sanctuarists, he has also publicly announced his commitment to use the money of his parishioners to fight the deportation of those illegal aliens who may not qualify for amnesty. In these efforts, the Archbishop has embraced the far-left Industrial Areas Foundation, the IAF, founded by the late Marxist and radical organizer Saul Alinsky. Alinsky's books, Reveille for Radicals and Rules for Radicals, are training manuals in propaganda, agitation, and confrontation, and are still the Bibles of the IAF. With Archbishop Mahony's help, the New York-based IAF has established 3 branch groups in the Los Angeles area: the United Neighborhoods Organization, the South Central Organizing Committee, and the East Valleys Organization. These groups work in concert with some 250 other affiliates in the IAF network throughout the United States. Casa Oscar Romero, a sanctuary center in Brownsville, Texas, that has funneled thousands of illegal aliens into the United States, is funded and run by the Catholic Diocese of Brownsville and Valley Interfaith, an IAF affiliate. Bishop John Fitzpatrick of Brownsville purchased the 6-acre site, paid for the construction of the center, and continues to fund its operations with diocesan funds. Although its trafficking in illegal aliens is clearly in violation of federal law, Casa Oscar Romero's operators have been virtually immune from prosecution. Federal officials refuse to go up against the bishop and the media, even though there's widespread opposition to the center from citizens and local government. Immigration issues top the IAF agenda, and IAF activists can usually be found leading the attacks on the INS and our immigration laws. Among the Foundation's powerful allies are farm labor agitator Cesar Chavez, one of Alinsky's prized disciples, and U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy, chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Immigration. In July of 1987, Kennedy traveled to Los Angeles to serve as the keynote speaker at the 10th anniversary celebration of the Industrial Areas Foundation Network of Southern California. The Sanctuary Movement, the IAF Network, and the Rights of Illegal Alien Coalitions all benefit from and in turn avidly promote the growth of so-called liberation theology in the Christian churches. Liberation theologists cynically exploit the churches to promote Marxism under a thin guise of Christian terminology. A leading objective of the liberationists is the radicalization of a sizable portion of the Hispanic population in the United States. Marxist agitators also promote the concept of Aztlan, or Mex America. Aztlan is an Aztecan word referring to a large area of the American Southwest they call the Chicano homeland. Aztlan was stolen by the Anglos, say the propagandists, but the Chicanos will take it back when they become the majority, through illegal immigration. Most Americans of Mexican descent don't subscribe to this subversive notion, but it is growing among the Hispanic population of the Southwest as these separatist extremists step up their militant propaganda. It's not Hispanics only, but all immigrants groups who are being agitated to demand their cultural and linguistic rights. With the assistance of the ACLU and publicly funded legal service attorneys, they've won lawsuits forcing the government to provide ballots and numerous publications, documents, and services, including public schooling in dozens of foreign languages. This is not only very costly, but even more important, it is extremely divisive. It removes much of the incentive for our newer arrivals to learn the common language of the land that allows our diverse peoples to communicate with one another and maintain a harmonious and civil society. It is also a disservice to the immigrants, whose opportunities for full participation in our political and economic system are severely restricted by the inability to read and speak English.
I'm an American. I'm not a Mexican American. I'm not a Hawaiian American or a Native American or an Afro-American. There's only one type of American, and that's an American citizen. And people must realize that we are deliberately being manipulated from the concept of being a melting pot society to a salad bowl of diversity. We are being encouraged to polarize ourselves from each other. And as has happened in the past with many other social engineering experiments by government liberals and lobbyists and special interest groups, they are trying to take the responsibility of providing a specific element of one's life under government control. As far as I am concerned, heritage is something that should be practiced and encouraged and stimulated in the home, not in the marketplace. When we go out into the marketplace, we speak the language of the land, and the language of the land should be a common language. And as far as I'm concerned, that language is English. The perpetuation of the concept of bilingual education and biculturalism under government mandate is a very dangerous concept, because what you are doing is you're creating an atmosphere where people do not feel that they have to assimilate. They can create these pseudo-nationalist movements and loyalties. Good example of where this has backfired in other countries has been the French Quebec separatist movement in Canada. Back in Africa, there have been various tribes and ethnic groups that have carried their spirit of heritage and nationalism to the point of warfare. To create this unity, to provide a strong government, to provide a strong citizenry, to perpetuate the ideas of freedom as a republic, requires a common language and a common bond and a common heritage, which is the United States of America, American citizenship.
In part one of this presentation, we mentioned the national security implications of our open borders, particularly with regard to the specter of international terrorism. While terrorist atrocities continue to capture headlines worldwide, relatively few major incidents have occurred on American soil. We can be thankful for that, but can we expect this good fortune to continue? Most probably not. In October 1987, 3 members of the terrorist Syrian Social National Party, the SSNP, were apprehended with explosives after crossing into Vermont from Canada. The Lebanese-based SSNP carried out the 1982 assassination of Lebanese President-elect Bashir Gemayel. It also is responsible for car bombings that have killed 105 people and injured hundreds more. The 3 are now serving prison sentences. In June 1986, a group of 18 Palestinian, Syrian, and Turkish nationals preparing to enter the United States illegally were arrested by Mexican authorities across the border from Del Rio, Texas. Evidence found on them supported the suspicion that they were connected with Middle Eastern terrorist groups. This Mexican newspaper gave the story prominent coverage. These photos show members of the group being arrested in Sabinas, Mexico. The map and inset trace the route that the 18 took from the Middle East to Mexico and then to the Texas border. It was Jerry Goodman, Border Patrol Chief of Del Rio, who first learned of the group's planned entry through sources in Mexico. He then alerted Mexican authorities.
Our unit, which is the anti-smuggling unit and intelligence unit of the Del Rio Border Patrol Sector headquarters, received information that there were a number of Arabic aliens in a hotel in Sabinas, Coahuila. We determined that they were contracting with a smuggler to come into the United States. There were 11 persons with Lebanese passports, 6 Syrians, and 1 Turk. The Mexican immigration officials transported the persons to Piedras Negras and processed them at the immigration offices there for not having visas to be in this area of Mexico, Sabinas. The persons ostensibly were admitted to attend the World Soccer Cup which was the largest event in Mexico at the time.
Some of those apprehended carried photos of themselves with automatic weapons and dressed in guerrilla garb. These are a few of those photos confiscated by the authorities. In January 1987, agents of the FBI and INS in Los Angeles arrested 8 individuals connected with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, an extreme militant wing of the PLO terrorist group. Deportation proceedings against the 8 have been tied up by ACLU attorneys for nearly 2 years. Meanwhile, the 8 defendants are out on bail, and Hollywood celebrities and the media champion their cause. In June 1986, Sheriff Gary Painter of Midland, Texas, received startling information from his department's intelligence sources in Mexico concerning terrorist training camps in that country.
The training camps, we were told, were mobile. There was Colombians, Cubans, and Libyans in the camps. The head man in the camp would be carrying an AK-47. His lieutenants or subordinates would be carrying H&Ks or fins, automatic weapons. And the people that were being trained would be carrying M16s or AR-15s. And that they would move throughout this areas that we have located up here to avoid detection. And we asked him, the informant, why they were being trained. And he said, well, Gaddafi has made the statement that he's going to attack the United States. What do you think they're being trained for? He was telling us about a lot of activity in the Oaxaca area, where the governor of Oaxaca is a communist, has allowed some 300 terrorists to come into Oaxaca through the state of Chiapas. A lot of movement through Tampico of terrorist activity coming into Mexico. The pink circles are the 5 camps where the terrorist training was located, Cubans, Colombians, and Libyans that were being trained and doing some training. These arrows right here indicate the movement of the 3 terrorists that came in to the Republic of Mexico and went to Chihuahua City and caught a bus from Chihuahua up to Juarez, Mexico. And in these red triangles are areas where intelligence network or intelligence sites could be situated to gather intelligence and filter it back to the United States. These areas on the Baja Peninsula are areas of debarkation where they had known of terrorists that were offloaded from boats and stuff and put onto these ports. This is also a large alien smuggling area in South Texas. And then the indication was that this area here in the green from there on south was very heavy in training activity, terrorist activity. I can truthfully say there's training going on right now of terrorists in Mexico. You can go into the Republic of Mexico just below Arizona and some parts below Chihuahua State and find Soviet flags flying. This is a propaganda kind of a magazine that was handed out in Mexico. And it's some revolutionaries that abdicate the overthrow of the Mexican government through assassination. And what brought our attention to it was the notice the stars located here. And then on this particular page of how close the stars are in relation to the terrorist training camps that we have on our map. Now also there was 3 stars that are circled here that are up inside what appears to be the United States boundary. And we're not sure of the significance of what it is. There's no telling how many people have gotten through into the United States. There's absolutely no way of knowing. There's no telling how many people are inside the United States that have the intention of doing harm to the citizens of this country. And I believe they're here. I don't know where, but...
How many of Khomeini's, Gaddafi's, Castro's, Arafat's, or Ortega's terrorists have successfully penetrated our border already? How many will enter next week, next month? Shouldn't our federal government be making it a bit more difficult for them to do so? Shouldn't Congress be making an effort to put us back in control of our borders? Unfortunately, when it comes to immigration policy, Congress is still being led by the radical Hispanic lobby and those who are committed to breaking down our borders. On July 28, 1987, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 237 to 181 to halt for 2 years the deportation of illegal aliens from El Salvador and Nicaragua. In March of 1988, the U.S. Senate, by a vote of 88 to 4, passed the Kennedy-Simpson bill, which would increase our legal immigration quota by 100,000 per year. A controversial proposal to establish a free trade zone all along the U.S.-Mexico border has many serious implications. The legislation, known as the United States-Mexico Border Revitalization Act, was introduced in 1984 by Bill Richardson of New Mexico. This bill authorized the President to negotiate an agreement with the government of Mexico for the establishment of a free trade and co-production zone extending 200 miles into each country's territory. Corporations that relocate to this 400-mile wide strip could enjoy not only low-cost Mexican labor, but also significant tax breaks. Congressman Richardson's current version of this bill, H.R. 1006, mentions no specific mile limit, but simply authorizes the President to negotiate with Mexico for a free trade and co-production zone. A major concern, although not the only one, is that this could turn the border region into a huge international industrial park, with American companies busing large numbers of Mexican workers deep inside the U.S. A 200-mile wide zone could have the effect of changing our 2,000-mile southern border into a 400,000 square mile non-border, making any kind of control virtually impossible. The situation on our borders and our immigration dilemma are already at the crisis point. Authors Palmer Stacy and Wayne Lutton accurately describe it as a ticking time bomb that threatens our continued existence as a nation. As political and economic instability in many areas around the world continues to worsen, the ranks of those seeking entry, legally and illegally, to this country will continue to swell. If the Soviet-Cuban Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua is not defeated and continues to spread, we may very soon be faced with millions of fleeing Central Americans at our doorstep. What can be done? First of all, we must recognize that we've arrived at our present predicament because the silent majority has been just that, silent, while the vocal, radical minority has maintained a high-pressure, high-visibility campaign, including a steady barrage of letters and communications to Congress. Find out how your representative voted on amnesty and other immigration votes. If he sided with those who are committed to breaking down the border, set to work to change his voting habits or vote him out of office. Demand that your senators and representative support legislation to prevent the counting of illegal aliens and other non-citizens in the census for congressional representation. There will be continuing pressure to grant additional amnesties to those illegal aliens not already covered by the present amnesties, and to continue expanding our legal immigration quotas. We must register overwhelming opposition to these proposals and soundly defeat them. Congress must pass legislation to prevent the massive chain migration that is certain to occur when the millions of newly legalized aliens are soon eligible to bring in their family members. Under current law, there is no waiting period and no numerical restriction on the number of immediate family members who may be brought in. Unless this exemption is removed and family members are included in a total immigration quota, we may soon be faced with having to accept several million legal immigrants in a single year. So-called free trade zone bills that blur border distinctions, that dilute U.S. sovereignty, and subsidize the relocation of American companies to the Mexican borderlands must be stopped. Student visas should be much more closely monitored, and educational institutions should be required to inform the INS when foreign students graduate or terminate their courses of study. Those individuals, organizations, and churches that participate in the so-called sanctuary movement should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law and should lose their tax-exempt status. If it's determined that foreign agricultural workers are indeed needed for the harvesting of certain crops, then a program that provides for regulated entry of temporary workers, similar to our old Bracero program, can be instituted. It's not necessary to sacrifice the security of our borders merely to get our produce to market. Securing our borders and enforcing our immigration laws must be made a priority issue with our federal officials. The Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Border Patrol, and the Customs Service must be given the manpower and the resources to carry out the jobs they are mandated to perform. In those border areas, like the San Diego-Tijuana sector, where Mexican and American communities have grown together, credible barriers, such as a double fence with a lighted, well-patrolled roadway in between, must be erected. Finally, we must recognize that U.S. foreign policy over the past several decades has been responsible for much of our immigration invasion. The mass migrations occurring now consist primarily of those who are fleeing the brutality of communism and the poverty of socialism. Most of these migrants would prefer to remain in their own countries if conditions there were more tolerable. The most sensible and compassionate thing we could do then is to support those movements, individuals, and organizations that are trying to free their homelands from the ravages of collectivism. Unfortunately, our government, directly and indirectly, supports those communist and socialist regimes most responsible for the enormous displacements of population. It's the U.S.-imposed socialist programs under U.S.-backed President Duarte, for instance, that have destroyed El Salvador's economy and brought hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans to this country. Successive U.S. administrations have supported the ruling Socialist Party of Mexico, the PRI, even as it nationalized virtually the entire private sector and plundered the economy. As a result, millions have fled north. And even though we can't accept all of these economic refugees, we can hardly blame them for trying to come here. The same can be said for refugees from communist oppression. If not for the enormous economic and technological aid which it receives from the United States, the Soviet Union could not maintain its communist satellites in Cuba and Nicaragua, which are destabilizing our entire Western Hemisphere. Unless we stop our elected officials from supporting communist and socialist regimes and movements, the immigrant-refugee flood is certain to swell much larger. These reforms that we offer are moderate, reasonable, practical, and affordable, and they are essential to regaining control of our borders and preserving our political and economic system. Ultimately, it comes down to this. We should either abandon our borders altogether, even the very concept of borders, and allow anyone and everyone who wishes to enter to do so, and then accept the consequences of such a policy. Or we should establish reasonable criteria and quotas and an orderly process for entry, and then commit sufficient manpower and resources to enforce the law.
Well, one of the conditions that these people are claiming is that if a person pays taxes, let's say he buys a pack of cigarettes, buys a gallon of gasoline, or makes any purchase that involves taxes, or he pays rent and of course, his landlord pays property taxes, this entitles him, the illegal, to vote because he is now a taxpayer. What you're seeing is a concerted effort to create the largest minority voting bloc this country has ever seen by the year 2000. Because the left, as we know it, believes that the power in this country lies in Congress, and that's true. And by controlling the majority of the congressional seats, you only need about 100,000 qualified voters in each congressional district to do this. You can control this country, which means that you can legally dismantle this country as we have known it and recreate it in a Marxist or socialist manner any way you want, and do it legally. And that's their intent.